Humility is the door to enlightenment. You didn't come here by accident. Perhaps a part of you is quietly searching for peace. If that's true, subscribe to Buddha Pray and stay until the end of this video, because here, every day we tell stories made not for the mind, but for the soul. Let me ask you something. What if the person you think you are, the title you hold, the power you carry, the respect you demand, isn't what defines your worth? What if true greatness isn't about how many people bow to you, but how willing you are to bow first? Today's story is about a retired general, celebrated by kings, feared by enemies, respected by an entire nation. But one day, a poor orphan child stood before him and said something so honest, so pure, that it shattered everything he thought he knew about strength. And for the first time in his life, he understood the path to true enlightenment begins at the moment you learn to kneel. His name was General Richard Hale, a war hero, feared by enemies, decorated by kings. He had led thousands into battle, made decisions that changed history, and at the age of 65, he retired. He returned to his countryside estate, a grand mansion surrounded by tall gates where servants bowed and villagers whispered his name with awe and fear. He enjoyed the silence, the control, the distance, but deep inside, he felt something missing. People respected him, but no one truly loved him. Then one day, a small boy slipped through the side gate, dirty, barefoot, thin. He was chasing a puppy that had wandered into the garden. A servant ran forward, ready to shout, but the general raised his hand, stopped him. He looked at the boy and asked, "What is your name?" The boy stood straight, not trembling, not scared. "My name is Eli, sir. I didn't mean to intrude. I was just trying to get my dog." General Hale smirked. "You're not afraid of me, boy." Eli looked into his eyes and said calmly, "No, sir. I've seen men with medals who had no mercy, and I've seen poor farmers who shared their last bread with me. I don't fear uniforms. I respect kindness." The general was silent. He didn't expect truth. He didn't expect clarity. He waved the boy inside, offered him food, listened to him speak. For the first time in decades, someone talked to him, not as a soldier, but as a human. In the following days, Eli visited again, sometimes bringing wildflowers, sometimes sitting in silence, feeding birds in the garden. The general began to wait for him, not because he needed company, but because the boy reminded him of something he had forgotten. One morning, Eli asked, "Why don't you smile, sir?" The general replied, "Smiles are for those who have nothing to prove." Eli tilted his head and whispered, or maybe, "Smiles are for those who no longer need to prove anything." Those words broke something open inside him. He had won wars, but lost the ability to kneel, to lower his voice, to admit he could still learn. That evening, he wrote in his journal, "A child came to me with dust on his feet and taught me humility. I spent a life mastering others, but now I'm beginning to learn how to master myself." Years later, when the general passed away, his funeral was simple. No loud trumpets, no salutes, but among the guests stood a young man named Eli, holding a bundle of wildflowers, eyes calm, heart full. And on the general's tombstone, someone had carved his final words, "To bow is not weakness, it is the beginning of awakening." In Buddhism, the highest wisdom often begins with the simplest act. To bow, not just with the body, but with the heart, with the ego, with the part of us that wants to be right, to be above, to be praised. The Buddha once said, "To conquer 1,000 men in battle is nothing compared to the man who conquers his own pride." Dhammapada, verse 103, General Richard Hale conquered many battlefields, but he had never conquered his self-importance, until one barefoot child taught him that kindness needs no medals, and respect comes not from rank, but from compassion. In the Itivuttaka, the Buddha teaches, even the great river bows to the ocean, and thus it becomes vast. Likewise, a person who knows how to lower themselves grows deeper, wider, closer to truth. Let me ask you, have you ever refused to learn from someone younger than you, poorer than you, quieter than you? Have you ever let your title, your knowledge, your achievements get in the way of your own growth? We all have, because the ego is loud. It tells us, you're better, you already know, you don't need to listen. But Buddhism reminds us, the moment you believe you're above others, you stop rising. General Hale lived for decades in command, but only in his final years, when he learned to listen, did he begin to awaken. Humility isn't weakness, it's strength in soft form. It is the ability to bend without breaking, to learn without defending, to love without superiority. The Buddha taught the fragrance of virtue travels against the wind. The humble are remembered long after the mighty are forgotten. And that is what we see in Richard Hale, not the general, not the medals, not the mansion, but the moment he wrote, I'm beginning to learn how to master myself. That was the birth of his true power. Dear listener, if you've ever been praised and felt a part of you rise, that's normal. And if you've ever been corrected and felt a part of you resist, that's also normal, because the ego wants to feel important, wants to be seen, wants to be right. But the soul wants to grow, and to grow, it must bow first. The story of General Richard Hale is not about a mighty man being humbled by failure. It's about a powerful man being awakened by presence, by truth, by a child who had nothing but honesty. Maybe today, you are that general. Maybe you carry knowledge, success, status. But ask yourself, do people love you? Or fear you? Do they listen to you? Or just agree with you? Are you surrounded by truth or by flattery? The Buddha once said, a tree that bears fruit bows lower. So the wiser you are, the softer you should become. The more you learn, the more you'll see. You know so little. And the higher you rise, the more important it becomes to kneel from time to time. So I ask you now, who do you need to listen to with humility? What truth have you ignored because it came from someone you believed was below you? What part of yourself still clings to superiority when what you really seek is peace? Share your story in the comments. Tell us what humbled you, what made you bow, what broke your pride and built your heart. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, send it to them, not as advice, not as judgment, but as an offering. A gentle whisper, there is no shame in bowing, only wisdom. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Buddha Pray, because every week we share stories not to raise your name, but to deepen your practice, not to feed your ego, but to awaken your soul. Humility isn't the end of your greatness. It's the beginning of something far greater.